want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. I am very proud to be here with my colleagues, Congressman Frank Wolf, Congressman Bill Posey of Florida, and my good friend and neighbor Pete Olson from Houston, on behalf of all of the men and women who have made our space program the greatest in the world, on behalf of a country that loves them and admires them. We're filing this legislation today to restore the NASA that we know and love, the NASA that we know is capable of maintaining that world leadership in space exploration if we would just make them get the politics out of NASA, allow them to do what they do best, to allow NASA to be led by the scientists, the engineers, the astronauts, the professionals that have made that agency such an extraordinary place. We are joined here together today arm in arm and are receiving great support for the legislation we're filing to make using the FBI and the National Science Foundation as models for the governance of NASA, and the United States Navy as a role model for the way that NASA will design, build, and fly rockets and spacecraft for the future. We're filing this legislation again to make NASA more professional, less political, to ensure that the Congress has an accurate and complete picture from the agency, from the professionals, of what they need in order to fund the rockets, the spacecraft, both human and planetary, that they believe in their best judgment is necessary to maintain a world American leadership in space for the agency. All of us grew up with the NASA that landed men on the moon, that has led the world consistently in every aspect of human and planetary spaceflight. And we are determined, all of us, to see that NASA restored and maintained so that America's leadership in space exploration will be unparalleled in the 21st century as it was in the 20th. It's a privilege for me to introduce my good friend and colleague, Chairman Frank Wolf, the Commerce, Justice, and Science Committee. Chairman Wolf, more than truly any other member of Congress, has done so much to ensure that NASA is funded, that we have a strong human and robotic and planetary space program, and it's a privilege for me to co-author this bill with him today. Chairman Wolf.
Well, thank you. I appreciate Mr. Culberson taking the leadership on this, and the other members too. In the 10 years since a tragic Space Shuttle Columbia accident, and the decision was made to transition to a new human spaceflight system, NASA has had three different administrators and two completely different shuttle replacement programs. Because NASA's human spaceflight plans were yet again abruptly altered at the start of the Obama administration, the U.S. will now be without a shuttle replacement until at least the year 2017, more than 6 years after the retirement of the Space Shuttle. And that's just in the last decade. If you look at the chart behind me, in several decades of similar experiences, and unfortunately these constant, abrupt policy changes, program cancellations, and new initiatives are costly to the taxpayer and have a demoralizing impact on NASA and the NASA workforce, and ultimately do not advance the U.S. leadership in space while our competitors race ahead. After 40 years of unquestioned U.S. dominance in space, the 21st century has already seen increased competition from other countries, including those who do not share our democratic values, such as China. The status quo has to change. And this leadership, but with this bill, the Space Leadership Preservation Act, is the effort to start a national conservation conversation on this, whereby we can conserve and energize and enhance the space program. There's no question that NASA is in need of it, so I'm pleased to be original co-sponsor. Let me cover a couple of the major points. A 10-year term that cuts across the presidential administrations. Director Mueller at the FBI has been there now. At the end of his term, will be there for 10 years. If the FBI had 3 different directors during that period of time, our fight with regard to terrorism and Al-Qaeda would be erratic, on again, off again. I think Director Miller's done a good job, but if you ask him, it's been the fact that there's been the continuity and the people working with him knew that he would be there for that period of time. Secondly, a board of directors to provide additional oversight, like the National Science Foundation. We fund the National Science Foundation that outside board can offer guidance, no political involvement, but really direct with regard to what the program should be. A concurrent budget submission to Congress, like the Legal Service. When Legal Services sends its budget to the Congress, it goes to OMB and then up, but we also see the authentic budget of what they need and what they prefer to do and how they would work. And lastly, a multi-year funding authority to do a flagship human planetary program like the military has for a number of years. I remember the day that the shuttle flew over here. Everyone came out of their offices, everyone looked, they stopped cars on Route 95 on 66. The excitement of the space program, and we can do that again. I think with the bill that Mr. Culberson and the other members have put together, provides the opportunity to take this out of the political process, to do something that really can make a big difference for our country, create jobs, and make sure that America maintains its leadership in space.
I'm Bill Posey from Florida 15. I grew up on Florida's Space Coast and remember all too well President Kennedy's call to land an American on the moon. It was an exciting time for the space program, and his challenge captured our collective imaginations, brought about advancements in technologies, and opened up new sectors of our economy. As a young man, I worked at the Cape for McDonnell Douglas as an inspector, just one of the many space workers who played a very small role in helping Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin land on the moon in 1969. We had 3 different presidents over that period of time, but nonetheless, NASA completed all the missions that had started. However, in recent memory, NASA and our space program have suffered from a lack of continuity. Accountability and long-term vision have suffered, mostly due to the mixed signals, as has been previously mentioned, from changing administrations and members of Congress. This lack of direction has resulted in billions of dollars of tax money being wasted over the years on half-completed vehicles and poorly planned missions. It's not enough to have a dream and a mission statement. And it's not enough to gather together some of the greatest engineers and scientists in the world. To succeed, A, there needs to be a plan, and B, there needs to be an ability to execute that plan. Without a strong NASA working on bold missions, the future of America's leadership in space, especially human exploration, is in jeopardy. Today, budgets are tight. NASA must do more with less. We cannot afford any more rockets to nowhere. Americans expect the best from NASA. The administration's canceling of the Constellation program after investing nearly $9 billion in 5 years of development is a perfect example of why these changes are needed. This bill also ensures that the recent success stories with commercial crew programs will continue on a positive trajectory. Going forward, no pun intended there, this bill fixes NASA's systemic problems and enables NASA to operate beyond short-term political goals or agendas. It adds accountability to the agency and puts an end to the abrupt terminations that have wasted too many limited dollars already. The ability to commit to longer-term projects will provide stability which benefits our national space program, our national security, and will build the stable workforce that's needed to maintain America's leadership in space. I applaud my colleagues, Congressman Culberson, Wolf, and Olson for their vision and their dedication to America's space program. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Pete Olson, and I represent the Johnson Space Center, Texas 22. When I moved there in 1972, it was called the Manned Spacecraft Center. And I'm proud to be here with my colleagues to introduce the Space Leadership Act. But it could have another name. It could be called the Neil Armstrong Leadership Act. You all remember Neil Armstrong, who we lost a couple weeks ago. He was a reluctant hero. Did not get involved in politics. Yet the administration canceled the Constellation program without talking to Congress, without talking to anybody at NASA, just a small cabal at the White House. Neil Armstrong became outraged. This bill takes care of the problems that Neil Armstrong was so concerned about. When I was 9 years old, I lived in the shadow of the Johnson Space Center. And I know what those people need. They're my football coaches, the astronauts were. I went to school with their daughters, their sons. And what they need is a mission. This bill gives them, addresses those needs. It makes sure that administrator is there for 10 years. Gets through 2 presidencies, assuming some president gets elected twice. It makes sure we get our budget directly from NASA, as opposed to the OMB the guys with the hatchets tear it up before we can see it in Congress. And most important, in my opinion, it gives NASA security by having a steady stream of funding for a multi-year period. Flew in the Navy for the United States, Navy for 10 years. Anytime you follow the Navy, that's good. I'm honored to be here with my friends, Chairman Wolf, my freshman colleague Bill Posey from Florida, and my colleague from Space USA who carried the water on this, John Culberson.
We'll be happy to take any of your questions. I know that Chairman Lamar Smith has already signed on as a co-author. I believe Senator Sensenbrenner, and I've not told him yet, Senator Hutchinson is keenly interested in picking this up and carrying it in the Senate for us. We've received broad support for the concept and a lot of positive feedback. We are filing it today so that we can move forward with the, as Chairman Wolf said, the conversation with the professional community, with our constituents, with the nation, with our colleagues, to ensure that this is the best approach, that we're truly removing as much of the politics from NASA as we can and restoring as much of the professionalism as possible to give them the stability and the assurance that they've got our support and we'll be behind them as they lead us into the 21st century, just as they've done over the last 50 years.
Question for Congressman Posey, WFTV Orlando. Isn't one of the big reasons that NASA has had to abandon a number of these projects because Congress keeps cutting NASA funding?
Well, that's part of it. They give them mixed. That's a large part of the reason, and they keep giving them mixed signals and directions. That's why they crafted this thing like they did, where we basically have a board of directors setting long-term policy, doing long-term procurement, so that the agenda doesn't change every time you get a new president or a new NASA administrator or a dozen new members of Congress that would break the tie sometimes on funding.
And one other thing, sir, have you talked to anyone at the Kennedy Space Center or at Johnson Space Center in NASA about whether this really would be a good idea?
We try not to involve them. We respect that they don't want to get involved in the politics of this, and so we didn't make that thing. The whole problem has been this has all been political, and the whole concept behind this is to take the politics out and put the science and good management practices in, and that's the nexus of it.
To be clear, no one at NASA has been consulted about it.
I haven't consulted them. I don't know if my colleagues have.
Yes. Yeah, oh yeah. Go ahead. Chairman Wolf had a comment though too.
The administration cut the program in the Mars program. In fact, the science advisor went out and hailed the landing on Mars, which was great. It's tremendous. But what he didn't say is they cut the Mars program. The Congress restored the money for the Mars program. The Congress put the money back in with regard to many of these programs that they were taking that had it not been for the action of our bill, the Mars program would have gone. So many times it's been the administration, and particularly the Obama administration, there's been more politics involved in NASA now than I've ever seen. So the Congress has restored, not cut.
I think that fire truck's running back and forth on purpose. You know, just waiting. Ross, you want to have a follow-up? Yeah, I did have a follow-up. I did. Oh, in terms of consulting, we've talked to flight... I didn't let him get down. That's the same guy that just went by. Yeah.
That's like that.
We have consulted, I know personally on my behalf, I know Chairman Wolf has visited with flight center directors and senior leadership at headquarters who have asked for obvious reasons not to get in the middle of this. We have talked to scientists, astronauts, engineers involved in the design and construction of these incredible machines that they build. And the uniform complaint that we got, the number one thing that they all want to see happen is that NASA be given some stability and predictability so that they're not forced to plan pillar to post year to year, which has resulted in, that's why we've got this chart up here. I want to make sure this graphic was prepared at my request by Mike Coates at the Johnson Space Center, who I have consulted with closely on this bill. Mike is a good friend, and Pete Olson and I know him very, very well. Mike Coates has been with NASA for 25 years?
25 years.
25 years. Mike Coates is a fighter pilot in Vietnam, shuttle pilot, and Mike Coates, in the 25 years he's been with NASA, has seen these 27 rocket or spacecraft programs created and then canceled. And nobody can work this way. It is a result of the not only inadequate funding from the Office of Management and Budget, it is on occasion from lack of support from Congress, but generally it's because of the design of the budget cycle. The agency, as a part of the executive branch, is obligated to follow the president's budget, which is released on February 1st. They don't have any choice. But we in the Congress, of course, are the ones that get the final say, but our appropriations bill can't be passed until sometime, if we're lucky, in the summer, generally in the fall. And in the meantime, these scientists and engineers have had to design their program based on what is always a low number from Office of Management and Budget. And then when we finally come in and fund it for the year, Congress has always supported NASA. The American people have always supported NASA, and we've been as generous as we can with them. But that number that Congress gives them towards the end of the year is higher than the lower number that OMB gave them, and you get this. And that's just got to stop. We want this magnificent agency to know how much we love them and support them as a Congress, how much the American people support them, and we want to give them the stability and the support that they need to do what they do best, and that's lead America in space exploration for the 21st century.
Let's go further with the question about, have we talked to you from NASA? I mean, I'm assuming, I'm talking with my people back to Johnson Space, but the same is true for Kenny, the same is true for Marshall, the same is true for Stennis, the same is true for Michaud. But basically, since the Constellation program got canceled, all they want is some certainty. That's all they want. Give them a mission. That's what they crave. I mean, growing up by the Shallow Johnson Space Center, I remember we lost the Columbia. They were in disarray. We lost our second shuttle. Another 7 Americans had died. What do we do? President Bush stepped up, got the shuttle flying back in, finished the space station, and he gave us a mission. Go back to the moon. That's what they crave, a mission. This bill takes the first steps towards doing that by eliminating the politics. That's why I'm a proud co-sponsor of it. Don't need to talk to them. They've already talked to me for 4 years now.
Yes, sir.
Congressman, though this question would apply to all 4 co-sponsors here. Would you gentlemen support Charlie Bolden being the first NASA chief for this 10-year term?
Well, if he is given the freedom and support that he needs to do what he is capable of doing best, I'm not sure. Charlie Bolden is pretty well handcuffed today, and it's very frustrating for all of us who love NASA and support them. We'd like to see Charlie Bolden and all the other space experts at NASA unleashed to do what they do best. Gene Cernan, for example, is a strong supporter of the bill. I want to make sure I read a quote from Captain Cernan, who said that America's space program is just that, America's space program. It has been a bipartisan commitment in the Congress since the days of JFK's challenge to go to the moon. But it has lacked long-term stability and focus because of the constantly changing political whims of the executive branch of government. This legislation is critical to providing the much-needed continuity for the future of NASA's far-reaching goals in space.
I just want to follow up that one too, because Charlie Bolden may still be a constituent of mine. And so I've got open mind about Charlie. You guys remember, when President Obama killed the Constellation program, Charlie Bolden came as administrator, testified before Congress, and he got creamed. He met strong opposition. He went back, he did what Marines do, tried to fix a problem. He worked with the quote-unquote Plan B with Mike Coates from the Johnson Space Center, Bob Cabana, I think, from KSC. Unfortunately, that thing went public, and Charlie got beaten back by the administration. But the answer is, I think Charlie's trying to do the right thing. Unfortunately, he's got an administration that doesn't want to pursue what he wants. He wants America to maintain our greatness in outer space. This administration just wants to be another little boys. Space hitchhikers for the Russians.
I want to answer that. I think Charlie Bolden's a good guy, and I think Charlie Bolden would flourish under this bill. And I think with this bill, Charlie Bolden would do a good job. I think the problem has been, I personally have a lot of confidence in Charlie Bolden. We've had political activity coming out of the White House, and we've had 1 or 2 individuals in NASA that have been politically insofar as doing this. But yes, I personally, not speaking of anybody else, I'd have a lot of confidence. I think Charlie Bolden is a patriot. He's a hero. The He served our country. His son is a Marine Corps pilot. So under this bill, I would have a lot of confidence that Charlie Bolden would make sure that America stays #1 in space.
Yes, it's a great answer. Yeah, for all of us.
Let's begin with Connect. Last year, Congress approved a study by the Space Studies Board to look at NASA's strategic direction. That report's not supposed to be out to the end of the year. Why jump the gun with this idea? Do you risk complicating their charter?
No, we spoke, Mr. Culberson and I spoke to the chairman of it about three weeks ago. We assured him we went through what they're doing. Nothing of this in conflict. They're not going to be talking about organization. So this fits very nicely with their recommendation. It does not counter anything that they're doing. This fits very, very nicely. It's like bookends. This will go very well with their recommendations that I think will be very powerful.
Because the focus of our bill is organization and governance in NASA, and the way in which we in Congress get to see their budget request. We're going to finally get to an honest, clear budget request from NASA without being filtered by OMB. So that, as Chairman Wolf said, is very consistent with the work of the Commission. Yes, sir.
Question: why are you introducing this bill now, so late in the current Congress? Do you think you've got a chance of at least getting it through the House this year? Why not introduce it in January with the new Congress and maybe a new administration?
We are offering the bill today because we want this to become, I hope, a part of the debate in the presidential campaign. We also expect to get a hearing in the Science Committee. We're very optimistic about having it reported out of the Science Committee before the end of the year. Again, we've encountered wide-ranging and very deep support for the concepts behind this bill. And again, we're focused on governance, the budget cycle, and ensuring that the agency is more professional, less political, and has more stability. Those are critical concepts that I think all of us agree, and the space community will agree, will give NASA the strength and the long-term ability that they need to build and fly these tremendously complex rocket and spacecraft systems. And so we expect to have a hearing and we hope pass it out of the Science Committee during the time when we're here after the election, before the end of the year.
And if the Science Committee, and I stress, if the Science Committee approved it and reported it out, I think we'd be open to carrying it as we mark up the continuing resolution going for the rest of the year. So it technically could become law by, if the Space Committee agrees, could become law by March or April next year.
Can you talk a little bit, just a little bit more about the money in all this? You said a steady stream of funding. Can you explain why this would be better for NASA monetarily?
Constellation. Well, I mean, one example. I mean, they're getting a steady stream of funding for Constellation. They got whacked, and so they're back to ground zero now. This gives them, probably a multi-year procurement, maybe 5 years. Okay, you got 5 years of funding. You know what you're gonna have. So don't worry about getting behind or some of the things that happen with Constellation. We'll stand by you. Let you resolve your problems. Again, getting the politics out of NASA. That's what hurts right now. Change administration, change in Congress, change in military. This bill that John took the lead on, it minimizes that.
The stability and the long-term leadership of NASA is critical, but for the first time, under our legislation, the Congress will get a unfiltered budget request from NASA that will not go through the Office of Management and Budget. OMB can submit their recommendation for NASA simultaneously with the recommendation from the NASA leadership. But for the first time, we'll actually be able to see what is it that the best minds in the country believe is necessary to fund and fly America's space program. Number one, we'll get an honest number. And number two, we are instituting long-term procurement for NASA rockets and spacecraft so that NASA will build rockets and spacecraft in the same way that the Navy designs and builds and launches submarines and aircraft carriers over a multiple year period, so that the agency then has some assurance that the contract's not going to be jerked out underneath it. We're following existing law for the expendable launch rockets. The solid rocket boosters on the shuttle are in current law. NASA can enter into long-term procurement contracts for those solid rocket boosters, and we're expanding that concept to rockets and human and robotic spacecraft. We've only got a few minutes left before this vote closes out. We genuinely appreciate it. We'll have any other follow-up questions that you need, just contact our offices. Please take a picture of this chart and we thank you all very, very much for coming out. But this chart gives you a vivid illustration of the scope of the problem and why this legislation is so necessary. And again, that came from Mike Coates at my request. Thank you all very, very much. Just call our office and we'll answer anything you need.